Shabbat Shalom, blessed Sabbath to you, wherever you may be. For those who would like teachings from a Hebraic root, or Torah keeping perspective, feel free to sign up, subscribe to this channel. This week we're going to be looking at Hannukah um, and the topic of searching for the eternal flame. Now, for those who don't know much about the festival, it goes back to the Seleucid Greeks. They defiled the temple. I think it was 167 BC, and Judas Maccabees and his brothers at some point I think it was 3 years later, they managed to take the Temple Mount back, and then they rededicated the altar. And the earliest texts we find around the festival definitely focus on the altar and the sanctifying of the altar. With time, however, it does shift a little bit, where it starts being called the Festival of Lights. And certainly at the dedication of the temple, they would have relit the menorah. That would have been part of it. But there were a whole lot of other things like showbread and many other services. Um, but there's this progression you see, and then even later in time, this is a few hundred years later, you get the very famous miracle of the lamps that comes through, which people hold in suspicion. Just so you know, I don't want to kill anyone's uh, day over this, but there's some suspicion around um, the lateness of when this is spoken of, and that originally the focus was more on the dedication of the altar, what Hannukah means, the dedication. Um, so let's just read what is said by I think it was in the Talmud. We get this. For when the Greeks entered the temple, they defiled all the oils therein, and when the Hasmonean dynasty they prevailed against and defeated them, they made search, and they found only one cruse of oil, which lay with the seal of the high priest, but which contained enough for one day's lighting only. Yet a miracle was wrought therewith, and they lit the lamp there for 8 days. And so maybe you've heard of that, maybe you've seen Hannukah, and it's got this focus on the menorah and that miracle. Um, Now, despite saying earlier that we see the altar was more the focus, and with time, the lighting of the menorah, there actually is an interconnectedness that we can find between the two. And what it requires is to understand this idea of the eternal flame, or um, the divine manifestation of God, and to begin with symbols of it with the temple. And one of them is we can see with the uh, the altar that was in the courtyard, and so we read, command Aaron and his son, saying, "This is the law of the burnt offering. The burnt offering shall be on the hearth of the altar all night until the morning, and the fire of the altar shall be kept burning on it." So this is an element we don't often think of, but in the temple, there was an element of, they kept the fire going there, and it would have been a symbol of, if you think about it, pillar of fire by night and cloud during the day. And so we can see a symbolic element that could have been in this fire. And fire offerings are, this idea of eternal flames and fire, actually get into a few religions. There's a famous one in Iran. Um, they have they have a temple there, to a fire temple, a famous one, and that one has a fire that goes back to, I think it's 1,500 years old, that this fire has been burning there. And so there would have been an element of continuity in the um, offering of the offerings of the temple, and that fire been going. In fact, when you look at plans of the tabernacle, we can see that um, there would have been an element of understanding the one who dwells in the Holy of Holies, and that the outside be a representation in a way of that one. For those who don't know, um, the temple, when you take it, um, do the crosshairs, you can see it highlights on, well, the divine presence that dwelt above the Ark of the Covenant, and the altar outside. When you do it to scale, you can see this lovely parallelism. And so, yeah, in Israel, they would have been aware, I believe, of these connections. Now, the eternal fire, or this idea of this continual fire going, uh, it 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 also has a divine connection through another way. Maybe you've already thought of that there's a divine connection to the fire of the altar of the temple, and it's quite interesting when you read this from um, from the book of Maccabees. You can see there's this emphasis there the on this issue, another issue of the altar and divine fire. When our ancestors were being taken into exile to Persia, the pious priests of that time took some of the fire from the altar and secretly hid it in the hollow place in the ground. Interesting, the mentioning of Persia here, because as you saw with Iran and these fire temples, and the Jews were taken to Babylon. It did extend to Persia, but kind of bringing up this kind of eternal fire idea. Um, Secretly hid it in a hollow place in the ground where they kept it safe so that the place was unknown to anyone. Many years later, when it pleased God, Nehemiah, who had been commissioned by the king of Persia, sent the descendants of the priests who had hidden the fire to look for it. When they reported to us that they had found no fire, but only a thick liquid, and he ordered them to draw it out and bring it. When the materials for the sacrifices were presented, Nehemiah ordered the priest to sprinkle the liquid on the wood and on what was laid upon it. When this was done and some time had passed, the sun, which had been clouded over, shone out, and a great fire blazed up, so that all marveled. Now, just so you know, I don't believe in the story here, but I do think in the second Maccabees account, I think we get an interesting element that would come through with the idea of Hannukah, dedication of the altar, remembering the dedication of the altar, and it's this element of from where did the fire begin, and and there's nothing wrong if the fire didn't begin with fire from heaven. We can see that with Abraham. He took his own fire with Isaac. We see with David as well. He actually at the altar in Jerusalem sets up, and there's no reference to fire from heaven. And he made an offering there, and it was pleasing. But we see something. There is something special that we see through the scriptures, that we see about fire from heaven, and the connection to be made is, well, firstly, I think we would all just say it's definitely a divine manifestation when this would happen. I think everyone's on the floor in adoration. The second is it would almost be a godly endorsement, like with Elijah and the prophets of Baal, when he's like, let it be known that you alone are Elohim in Israel, and this the prophets of Baal have nothing to do with you, and you are the only true God, and the fire comes down, and what that symbolizes, it's like a confirmation um, of that whole sacrifice and what it represents. Now, with the temple, it goes even further, because with the temple, what it signifies is, well, their desire was more than just starting the fire, but if he found pleasure and started the fire, it was as though you had the confidence there as well, what was the heart of it, and that you would dwell in our midst. And yeah, I think so. We see a shift here with the Maccabees account in this regard, because I'm sure when you read everything about the dedication of the first tabernacle and the first temple, I don't get a sense of this was just the, the rays of the sun setting this off. Um, so in Leviticus 9, 23, 24, we get this idea of, and fire came out from before Yehovah, consumed the burnt offerings, and the people fell on their faces. Same with Solomon. A while later, fire came down from heaven. So, and so we need to understand the glory. And you get a feeling that from the Maccabees account that they're almost playing down or dumbing down the idea of the glory, and what constituted fire from heaven. And because in the Torah, I think sometimes you've got to approach it as children, um, that, well, there's nothing really like the divine presence or what you get from these encounters that, and I'm going to use messianic phrasing here. It's almost as though we could say, if you've seen this glory, then you've seen the essence of the Father. Or we could say the glory and the Father are by mystery one. And this fire is a divine fire and was with God from the beginning, that this is of the essence. And it's literally the divine eternal flame begotten by mystery. And so quite a departure we see from what they're trying to present. But you see, it's got to do with Hannukah, it's got to do with the dedication of the temple and what constitutes um, his dwelling in their midst. And certainly they would have loved the idea of him dwelling in their midst, but you get a sense of they're pushing, they're getting a bit creative here in the story rather than just acknowledging where things are. And I think there might be a few reasons for that. The first is what the prophet Haggai said, was that the glory of the second temple, this is of that time of the Maccabees, we're talking Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, that temple would be greater than the former. And I would imagine this perplexed a few people, especially if the people had not witnessed something like what we read of before the exile, of the smoky presence and and that kind of thing. Um, However, there's no excuse for getting creative here and I believe make up stories. But we see this issue of the eternal flame was an issue, and and I think there was um, a searching amongst themselves as to how can we bring the glory back, because it is described in Ezekiel chapter 11 that at some point the glory departs from the temple and goes to the 10 tribes, and leaves Judah in a sense. He says, I'll be a sanctuary to them for a while. And then also, and this is important because it's actually kind of spoken of with by Moses in Deuteronomy 33 concerning Joseph, who led the 10 tribes. And this is connected because the ancient Jews would have known that it was prophesied that the one who dwelt in the burning bush would watch over Joseph, which seemed to happen at this time or different occasions. It's a mystery, but I don't want to get too much into that. But they would have known the one in the burning bush is linked to the fire from heaven, is linked to the eternal flame, as it were, and that the glory of the one who was in the bush, that is what used to ignite the offerings in that special way. All right, and so I really believe the Jews have wrestled with this for a long time. Hannukah, I can see how well, we'll get into that, but this idea of the eternal flame coming to be. So, in terms of the synagogue, um, what we see there, and you may not know this, is that they have something called Ner Tamid, what they call an eternal flame, and this or eternal light. And I just want to read this. It is the light that traditionally burns perpetually, so it's always meant to be on in the synagogues, usually placed above the ark where the Torah scrolls are kept. Its origins and meaning are deeply tied, and this is what will be quite interesting, hopefully to you, is that it's deeply tied to the menorah. Um, and the menorah of the tabernacle and the temple, and the broader understanding of divine presence, eternity, and covenant. Now, I find this quite interesting because, well, if you ask the rabbis, what is the light of the menorah connected to, they will tell you it is the Shekinah, the glory cloud, um, and more importantly, what is the menorah itself connected to? And I'll let you look at the picture again here. Um, what do you think of when you think of branches with buds, blossoms? You get the sense of a tree on fire, but not consuming the tree. You get a sense of the burning bush. And the rabbis themselves say the menorah is linked to the Shekinah, and the Shekinah was in the burning bush. I got the passage here. Read it, and the messenger of Jehovah appeared unto him. Um, in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. But notice the messenger of Jehovah. There is this one that is connected to the Shekinah, and if you join the dots, you realize this one is connected to the presence of God and dwelling, uh, this mystery of Him dwelling in the midst of Israel, and they obviously yearn for that. And I think the the whole menorah thing of the perpetual lighting of the menorah is just a transferal of the understanding of the importance of the eternal light with um, lighting the altar if choosing to dwell in their midst. Um, and it kind of reads that way a little bit when you read it in Exodus, but it's not. It says, "Yes, you shall burn the light always," but you get a better context where it's that it's more about the continuation of the ritual again and again, because every evening it was for the evening that they were lit um, by Aaron every night, but it was the altar fire that they say was continued all the time. So really, we join the dots, and we really do see. Hold on, um, this messenger of Jehovah, he's linked to the um, Isaiah 63, the messenger of the covenant, um, and so we can see, hold on, the messenger of his presence, that he is linked to that. And, um, and so it's interesting when looking at Judaism, just so you know, because Judaism has kind of taken away the one thing that's important about the Ner Tamid, and that is that a flame of fire of all things, the one thing it's trying to communicate is that it is to be seen. That is to be seen. And yet, Judaism, because of the walk they've had, they move this to um, ideas that are typically not seen. Like, well, this is just talking about divine inspiration, like the prophets through the Spirit, divine, but it's not something that's ever going to be manifest. And the unseen covenant, they speak of the eternal, that this represents the eternal Jewish spirit, and in the general sense of God's unseen but his watchful presence. And so it's become almost profanity in Judaism's mind that, well, no, within a messianic framework, we believe that this flame of light is to be seen. We would even go that step further and say, well, it was seen, and it is a person, a literal manifestation, and that manifestation is the Son of God. And I didn't know this, but I know that some churches are they're constructed after the same, with a lot of same ideas as the synagogue, and some of them actually have what they call a sanctuary lamp related to the Ner Tamid, to represent also the eternal flame, which they, by tradition, have said represents the Messiah, the Anointed One. So the big question I really think that is here is is it a person? Is the Shekinah related? Is that manifest present related to a person? And this is one of my heart's desires for the Jewish people, that they will see him and they will know the Ner Tamid, that it is Yeshua HaMashiach. That Jacob wrestled with this one, um, and you can find him if you go to Hosea chapter 12. Um, yeah, if you want to find, go to Samson, go to Manoah, and you will see the one who would light these fires as the fire of God. Similarly, the guide in the wilderness, the light that shone for Israel in the 40 years, again, you can find this one if you go to Exodus. And I think John really sees Yeshua in this really deep sense, that we're not treating this as a metaphor. We're not treating this as just an unseen thing. This is very real. And he really he summarizes in his first chapter, which is just loaded, where he says, "And we beheld his glory." Before the same, the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us, and we beheld his glory. The glory is of the only begotten. And um, yeah, I like what else is said there in John 1. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. Um, and so there we have it. I think very much connected. And so I do wonder, when John wrote those words, it was he went to the feast of dedication. He went to Hannukah. Yeshua was there, and when he was there in those colonnades of Solomon, whether in John's mind he viewed this as, this is the one, this was actually his house. And I often wonder, because often I feel a bit like, is this something to be emphasized, this element of divinity? Who is this one? And he always says, "Who do you say that I am?" And it's a hard one to grasp, but the Gospels do move us to really see this as someone great. And I often wonder whether John wondered, I mean, he wrote on the inspiration of the Spirit, but I wonder whether he wondered, um, had he gone maybe a bit too far and some of these things. But after, they say that after he had written his gospel, he had the revelation on Patmos. And I love what he saw here, and it must have just been such confirmation to everything we've been talking about in terms of the Ner Tamid, the eternal light, he who no one, whose light no one can put out, the light of light. Um, in Revelation 1, we read, "Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning, I saw 7 golden lampstands. In the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe, with the golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace. And his voice was as the sound, was like the roar of many waters. And his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was like the sun shining in full strength. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he laid his right hand on me, saying, 'Fear not, I am the first and the last.'" And makes me think of Paul writing um, to Timothy, and the description he gave there. And it's not as good in the King James, where don't think it interprets it right. There it says, looking for the blessed hope of the glorious appearing of the great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. The ESV, I think, is better. Waiting for our blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. That He always was the glory from the beginning. And so, big question: who is the Ner Tamid of the synagogue? Is it okay to see this this one as manifest as a person? That I just finish with reading from Ezekiel, and I think we have a beautiful picture of the reality of this one, the one Isaiah saw and called his Lord, who he saw in the temple. And above the firmament, Ezekiel 1:24-28, and above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone. And upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness as the appearance of a man above upon it. And I saw as the color of amber, as the appearance of fire round about within it, from the appearance of the loins even upward, and from the appearance of his loins even downward. I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and it had brightness round about, as the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud in the day of rain. So was the appearance of the brightness round about. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Jehovah. And when I saw it, the it could also be translated as, and when I saw him, I fell upon my face and I heard a voice of one that spoke. Now, I really believe, let us believe in the manifest and tangible, the physically understandable eternal flame, the divine presence of our God. I really believe Jacob wrestled with him, touched him, felt him. Moses looked at a real light. This wasn't the sun coming through the branches or anything like that. It was the light, the heavenly light. That fire. Same with um, all Israel at the mount with Solomon. They saw the cloud. They knew that cloud, and it was real. And I also believe in the first century in their colonnade, I really believe that this one that said, "I am the light of the world," as John said, I really believe this. We beheld his glory, and so all glory to Yeshua. And so, although the menorah is not necessarily right at the core, it is in a sense that we search out and we understand the altar, the desire for the divine presence to return, and how this theme is still present and prevalent within Israel. Much love and Shabbat Shalom.